Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Wright. I am one of the special education team leaders with Lincoln Public Schools, and I am here today to talk about coaching and what that looks like when we think about coaching practices, specifically at Tier 3. So to start off, I wanted you to think about what are some key coaching skills, because we can't dive into the practices and how we improve fidelity of their implementation without thinking about what are those key skills that we need to embody and utilize in order to effectively coach our peers or those teams that we're working with. So think for a second, jot down a few words that you would use to describe effective coaching skills. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of information specifically related to coaching. But as I think about the work that I've done in my current role of coaching support center teachers, which are special education teachers specifically supporting behavior in our schools, or coaching teams, these are some key skills that I utilize often that I think are important to build those relationships with teams, with teachers. When we build those relationships, we have an increased or higher buy-in for those recommendations or those things that we might be asking them or supporting them to do. Communication is key, letting people know. It could be logistical communication around when I will be in the building, but also communicating effectively what recommendations or what ideas might be beneficial to try. And part of that communication is not just what, but also why. So communication skills are important as a coach. I utilize a lot of empathy. I'm going in and supporting teachers and teams that are boots on the ground every single day. They're in the trenches doing really hard work. And so I have to remember and utilize empathy regularly to support them and validate the concerns and the challenges that they're experiencing, while also pushing them to implement effective practices. And then lastly, a key skill for me as a coach is active listening, and really listening to understand, kind of listening between the lines. We often talk about reading between the lines, but listening between the lines and listening for concerns that they might have or areas things that they've tried that I might be able to help them tweak and use in a different way. Listening for conflict between different team members that I might be able to support. So I'm listening for to the messages that they're communicating, but I'm also listening for those subliminal messages that they may not be directly communicating with me. These are 4 key skills that I use often as a coach. There's a lot of research and information out there, like I said, on effective coaching practices that you could look into more. Elena Aguilar, Jim Knight, there's lots of coaching resources that are available. So when you think about coaching fidelity at Tier 3, there are 2 key areas that I support on a daily basis. And one of those is to support teams to implement effective FBAs, or functional behavior assessment, and behavior intervention plans. So that's that individual student plan that is based on the function of their behavior. So not only supporting and coaching how to write an effective BIP, but also then coaching the fidelity of that. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? The other key area of coaching that I provide support in is a student support center, which in our school district is a special education program designed to support students with intense behavioral needs. So it's a specific type of programming designed to teach and reinforce at that high rate to meet those intense behavioral needs. So I'm going to talk through each of these areas. So first we'll look at FBA and BIP and how do we coach to support implementation and fidelity of those practices. So just a reminder, so we're all on the same page of a few FBA and BIP look-fors. So when we're coaching, it's important to know exactly what we're looking for. And in the FBA, the functional behavior assessment, the goal is to determine the function of the student's behavior. So when looking at an FBA, looking for what data did the team use to make those decisions? Does the data support the identified function? Has the team looked at all of those environmental factors of what's happening before the problem behavior and what's happening after the problem behavior? So really looking at and then supporting teams to investigate to the fullest extent what those variables are, because when we identify a challenging behavior that we want to address, and then we effectively identify the function, then we go on and we develop a BIP, or a behavior intervention plan. And the goal of that BIP is to develop a plan with function-based strategies. The more these strategies are connected to the function, the more likely they are to be effective. A key area of coaching in this, for me, is to help teams actually select function-based strategies, or help them identify if some of the strategies that they say, like, this one's not working, or we've tried that one, but we're not seeing the results that we want. Helping them look into what's going on and dig into, are those strategies function-based? If they're not, that can lead to an ineffective plan. So helping teams look at that and then implement those function-based strategies. The goal of the BIP is to prevent, teach, and reinforce. One misconception about BIPs that often comes up is that it's the plan for how we're going to respond to problem behavior. And that can be part of it. We can plan to reduce accidental reinforcement of problem behavior. We can plan for how we're going to respond, but a BIP is so much more than that. A BIP also identifies strategies for how we're going to prevent that problem behavior from happening, how we're going to teach the student to do something different, and how we're going to reinforce appropriate behavior when that does happen, when they do utilize that replacement behavior, when they do show other pro-social or appropriate behaviors. So a BIP needs to include all of these parts. So when we think about coaching fidelity of a behavior intervention plan, another key area is helping teams ensure that they're identifying strategies in all the areas. So there's some common challenges that I find myself coaching often. And those are that it's important to make sure that the strategies in the BIP match the function, including the replacement behavior. It can be hard for teams sometimes to identify and to select strategies, or maybe they've tried things before and they didn't work, and so then they're stumped on what else to try. But like I said, if strategies in the behavior intervention plan do not match function, the likelihood that they're going to be as effective is not as great. So it's important to coach around making sure that those strategies do match function. And a key role as the coach is to help brainstorm what those might be. So if a student's function is to avoid work, helping brainstorm, how can we prevent that problem behavior from happening? Instead of crawling around on the floor and making noises to avoid work, what could we do ahead of time to set that environment up to make it less likely that the student does that problem behavior? Maybe we adjust where the student's seated. We adjust how much access they have to help by their seating. Maybe we adjust what the task is. Maybe we provide an alternate way for them to ask for help. So there's lots of things we can do preventatively to set the environment up to make that problem behavior less likely. But all of those strategies match function. It's also important to make sure that the reinforcement is frequent and consistent. A challenge that often comes up is because we're experiencing problem behavior, reinforcement actually decreases. There's not as many opportunities, and there's not, staff aren't seeing those opportunities because of the challenging behaviors that they're experiencing. So it's important that that rate of reinforcement be high, be frequent, and be consistent. Sometimes we have to plan out what that looks like as a team. So as a coach, that's a role in the way in which I coach around that challenge is, let's determine a plan of reinforcement that is frequent enough that it will actually start to shift that behavior. And sometimes we have to get as specific as, this student should earn that reinforcement at least once an hour, or at least every half day, so that it's very concrete for staff what that term frequent means. Because sometimes a reinforcement system is set up that the student has access to it weekly, and that maybe that worked at one point, or maybe that feels really frequent to us as staff members. So it's important to define what that means and help support teachers and other staff to know exactly how often they should be giving that reinforcement. And the last common challenge to coach around is to make sure that there's a plan for monitoring. A BIP is not something where we just like, check, we got it done, we wrote the plan, and we're done. We should be monitoring that regularly. We should be scheduling times to come back together as a team and review, is it working? Is it not working? How do we know? What data are we using? And if it's not working, what are we going to do? So we need to have that schedule for monitoring the effectiveness and also the fidelity. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we implementing what we said we were going to implement to the degree in which we said we would implement it? So all of that becomes part of the monitoring, so that it's not just a one and done and it gets put on a shelf to get dusty. We want that to be the living day-to-day plan for that student that staff are informed of and they understand how to implement it. So there's some FBA and BIP resources that I will show you and walk you through how I use those as a coach. The first one is replacement behavior approximations. Sometimes it can be challenging for teams to understand how we're going to move from what's currently going on to that desired behavior. It seems like a really big leap, and sometimes it is. Sometimes that can be hard for families to understand. Sometimes that can produce questions with staff or with team members. So this is a tool that can help everyone be on the same page and see how we're going to move from what's currently going on to and working towards that desired behavior. So if we identify a replacement behavior as the student will ask for help by showing a break card, and they can do that unlimited times throughout the day. That's another area you might have to coach around and work through as a team. But we're not going to live there forever. And so this is a tool where we could outline, okay, if we're starting with unlimited breaks, maybe step 1 is that they would have 4 per day. Maybe step 2 is 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And so you see how you can start to lay out some of those, the progression of skills and what that's going to look like. Everybody can have voice in that process, and everybody can see and understand how we're going to progress through those skills. This is a competing behavior pathway. This one, if you Google it or if you look on Midwest PBIS Network, you can find a template for it. This one is actually very specific to our district, so it's not linked, but you can get that resource online. But this is a graphic format of the FBA and the BIP. So the FBA is on the left, the BIP is on the right, and it walks through, you start with that basic behavior chain with the FBA, identifying what's going on, what's that problem behavior, what are the environmental pieces around it, what are we working towards, knowing we're starting here, but what are we working towards? And then let's identify strategies that directly address that problem behavior and also match function. So that's a graphic format of working through that FBA and BIP process. This is a document that can be used to guide through that behavior intervention plan or that BIP process. One side has guiding questions. So if a team ever feels stuck on what's a good replacement behavior, how do we know that this replacement behavior might work? So maybe they're stuck on a specific area of the BIP. There's guiding questions to help a team kind of work through that. The other side has example strategies. It is not the be-all, end-all list by any means, but sometimes teams can feel stuck, or they can feel stumped around, okay, we know that the strategy should be function-based. Where do we start? How do we even begin to brainstorm? And so those strategies can help kind of kickstart that thinking around 2 common functions that we see, and that's attention-seeking behaviors or behaviors whose function is to avoid the task. So that is a resource that is available also. And then it's important to use data, whether it's district data, whether it's building data, whether it's team data, whether it's student data. It's important to use data to drive the decisions that we make. So this is data that I have used to identify areas for district growth and areas in which we can better coach in our district. So it's important to use data. And this was from a tool called the TATE, T-A-T-E. And that tool can help determine how well an FBA or a BIP is written. It is not a fidelity measure. Fidelity measures are checking to see if we're doing what we said we would do. But that's a tool that can help determine, was it well written? And as you can see, there's some opportunities for growth. And so this data was then utilized to determine how do we best support teachers and teams in our district. So some key questions that I find myself asking as a coach are, when I'm working with teams, which students have BIPs? Do we know that? Do all of the students that should have BIPs, do they have them, and are they current? Was it 5 years ago that we revisited that, 3 years ago, last year, this school year? So it's important to know how recent that is so that we make sure that the students that need a current BIP have a current BIP. Where are they all located? In our district, it's part of our electronic information system, but if it's not part of that, where is it located and how do people access that? Has it been communicated to staff? So communication around individual programming or those individual plans is important. So who needs to know? Do they have the information? And then do they know how to implement everything that they're being asked to implement? And then monitoring. How are those BIPs being monitored? Is there a system for that? Is there a team of people regularly reviewing if the BIPs are working or not? And are we implementing those BIPs with fidelity? We should be checking, and not as a gotcha, but we should be checking to make sure that we're doing what we said we were going to do. So the second key area of coaching when we think about intense behavior that happens is around those student support centers or those specific programs designed to support students with more intense needs. And there's quite a few support center look-fors, and these align directly with Tier 1 classroom look-fors. So you'll see things like expectations, procedures, active supervision, engagement. Those are the same practices that classroom teachers are expected to utilize to support student behavior. In a support center, we don't do different things. We do things at a higher rate and at a greater intensity. We do have some extra practices, interventions like FBA and BIP for students that are accessing that. But overall, the practices, the look-fors, the things that we do in a support center are the same practices as Tier 1. We're just doing that on a more intensified level. So I'm going to go through a few of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but give some key reflection or coaching questions that can be asked to coach around those specific practices within a specific program. So when we think about relationships, there's some key characteristics of what we want those relationships to look like. But then as we reflect, does that environment promote relationship building? When we think about interactions that staff are having with students, tone of voice, body language, are we seeing those strategies observed that we know support effective relationships? When we think about programs that are supporting students with intense behaviors, we know that there's going to be an element of discipline or consequences that may need to happen, but we need to have that balanced with the relationships that we have with students. So are we checking and being reflective and honest about the balance between the relationship and the discipline that might need to be used? Pre-corrections. Pre-corrections are those quick prompts before anything happens. So if we're going into the hallway, a pre-correction is that prompt right before to hopefully to make it more likely that that transition would go successfully. So when we reflect on the use of pre-corrections in a support center, we might be thinking about what's the most difficult time of day? When was the last time those expectations were reviewed? How could a pre-correction prompt more appropriate behavior? So there's a video linked there that also talks about pre-corrections that you could watch. Thinking about procedures, whether it's overarching or overall classroom procedures or specific procedures that a specific student might engage in. We have to think about, are they posted? Are they taught? Have we reviewed those regularly? When we think about problematic or chaotic times in our day, we can reflect and think, could we put a procedure there that makes this go more smoothly? Think about the how. So as a coach, looking at how are those taught to students? Is that an area I could coach or I could support to increase the teaching? And then how do staff know? So if there's additional staff coming into the support center, how do they understand or know the procedures that are posted? Student engagement, just like in a classroom, any classroom, or even with adults. If we're engaged in something, the likelihood of problem behavior goes down. The same thing applies in a support center. Support centers should not be places where we see kids just doing busy work or large packets of work. We want them to be engaged in meaningful tasks. So we have to be thinking about, how do students receive academic instruction? What's their schedule? How do we monitor that the activities that we're asking them to do are meaningful and not busy work? So we need to be consciously thinking about each of those pieces related to student engagement. Thinking about the use of reinforcement. I mentioned when we talked about behavior intervention plans that we have to think about the rate and making sure it's frequent and consistent. When we think about programmatic or overall reinforcement, whether it's the program as a whole or something for an individual student, it has to be frequent enough that we start to see that shift in behavior. So some coaching reflective questions that might come up or might be utilized are, what type of reinforcement is being used? How often is that given? Or watching for those things and then giving feedback. What's that praise to correction ratio? Do we see more praise and positive feedback being used than correction? How do we know when reinforcement should be adjusted? Well, we know reinforcement works. So if we're not seeing the benefit of that, we might need to come together, bring the team together to look at what tweaks or adjustments might need to be made. Responding to problem behavior. It's important that this be planned out, that we talk through, that we coach around what options are available. How do we effectively respond if we experience problem behavior? And that includes more intense behaviors as well. So coming together as a team and talking about, what is that plan? How do we include our functional knowledge when we respond? How do we help each other on a team? How do we coach around using that least exclusive option? And then how do we teach those to all staff and students that are accessing that program? So responding to problem behavior can feel like a big part of a support center teacher's job, but if we can plan around those things and we can implement those effective preventative practices, the likelihood of responding should go down. Planned instruction. A large part, a key part of an effective support center is planned instruction. That intentional social skills instruction that targets those missing skills. So just having a student access a different location is not going to teach them any new skills. So it's one of our roles to coach and to support is the implementation and of that explicit social skills instruction. So coaching around what curriculum is being used, providing additional resources if needed, looking at how some general social skills are being taught. Maybe that's coping skills, maybe that's anger management skills, maybe that's emotion identification skills. Also, though, the explicit instruction of that replacement behavior, so that instead of the problem behavior, we see more of that replacement behavior that we're teaching to the student. So there's a few support center resources that are frequently utilized as a coach. And one is the core components. So each of those core components, looking at what that is, how that might be implemented, and then supporting teams to identify action steps. And also using data. It's important just like with FBA BIP, with any practice that we're implementing, to monitor the implementation with data and make adjustments accordingly. So using data to make those informed decisions about where the needs are, and then how do we directly support those needs. If you have any questions about either of these coaching areas, whether it's FBA BIP or support centers or any of the resources that I provided, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I would be happy to answer questions or share any other resources that you might be interested in. But again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great day.